Hello there, friend. Welcome back to History for Thinkers, a show that brings history to life and makes it easy to understand. In this episode, we are going to be continuing the infamous Kampf series. One of the craziest books ever written. You already know that. Let's get into it. Before we get into the episode, I want to say thank you to everyone over on Patreon. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for supporting history content, and I want to personally thank Matthew Wyzurek for becoming the very first financer over on Patreon, which is actually the highest tier available. So in addition to getting all the bonus episodes, the postscript episodes, you will also get your name displayed in every video as long as you are a patron, as long as you are a financer. So thank you, Matthew, for becoming the first. If you also want to get your name displayed in the beginning of every video, you can head on over to patreon.com/historyforthinkers. Thank you so much, Matthew, and anyone else who becomes a patron. Now, let's get into it. So we've gotten to about page 130 now, and we're to the point where Hitler starts really railing against Marxism and its evils and terrible, and he talks about how he's studying it personally, which, he says, actually, I plunged deep into the study of that destructive teaching. I think he's lying here. I don't think he actually read Marxist literature. And if he did so without an open mind. Like, he went in with his own opinion and was basically looking for flaws or, things that they said were wrong, and basically just doubling down on that. I like to think about it like a science experiment. When you read political opinions of someone else, you are trying to get a window into an issue or a problem or a way of viewing the world that'll ideally bring you closer to reality. That's the way we're supposed to read other people's ideas and other people's thoughts, right? With an open mind. When you go into something and you already have your own preconceived notions and conceptions, right? Like, you already have your opinion about it. You're not doing it with an open mind. Now, I'm not saying that Marxism is right, definitely far from the case, but they had some legitimate grievances. They had some decent arguments. After all, how many millions of people joined the ranks of the communists? All those people weren't stupid and crazy and wrong about everything. Now, were there flaws in the ideology? Absolutely. But there was some part of Marxism that was connected to reality. And Hitler just doesn't see that. He doesn't see it. He doesn't acknowledge it. This is just complete evil, complete stupidity, completely wrong. And as any intelligent person will know, it is really difficult to convince anyone of something that's a complete outright lie. Try convincing someone that the sky is orange. Can't do it. Right? I mean, people look up and they're like, oh, it looks like it's blue. It's blue. I'm looking at it right now. It's blue. You're going to have a really hard time convincing someone that it's orange, right? Because it's so far removed from reality that it's funny. That's what Hitler makes the Marxist argument out to be like. So I just don't think he actually read it, or, even if he did, he didn't do it with an open mind, which is, at that point, what's the point of reading it? Because he doesn't come out of this with, an argument against Marxism. I mean, I've gone through Mein Kampf quite a few times, and I've never really seen a good argument against Marxism. He just calls it evil, which, not really effective, right? I mean, maybe for propaganda purposes, but if you want any connection to reality, there is none. There is none, right? And of course, he departs from reality even more down here when he writes, quote, I also made a further and more thorough analysis of the relations between Marxism and Jewry. And this is where he kind of makes this big connection that Marxism is the ultimate evil, right? But the reason Marxism exists in the first place is because the Jews created it. And that is the truly nefarious part of this whole ideology. It's basically, I want you to imagine someone who is a conspiracy theorist that believes in aliens. Now, if you really believe that the aliens, they were here, they were controlling our governments, they were enslaving people, murdering people, doing all kinds of horrible stuff, you would be justified in attacking the aliens, in hurting the aliens, railing against them, calling for people to uprise against them. That would be an understandable response. But what if those aliens don't actually exist? Well, under those circumstances, you're just some crazy person that wants to hurt innocent people. Really, that is the case. And I think that's a really good way to think about what was going on with the Jews and Nazism. You know, it was basically this case of they're controlling the world and we need to stop them. And I think this entire paragraph warrants being read. So let's go through this here. Quote, I consider the disastrous policy of the Triple Alliance, the one between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, as one of the consequences resulting from the disintegrating effects of the Marxist teaching. For the alarming feature was that this teaching was invisibly corrupting the foundations of a healthy political and economic outlook. Those who had been themselves contaminated frequently did not realize that their aims and actions sprang from this Weltanschauung, worldview, which they otherwise openly repudiated. Long before then, the spiritual and moral decline of the German people had set in, though those who were affected by the morbid decadence were frequently unaware, as often happens, of the forces which were breaking up their very existence. Sometimes they tried to cure the disease by doctoring the symptoms which were taken as the cause. But since nobody recognized or wanted to recognize the real cause of the disease, this way of combating Marxism was no more effective than the application of some quack's ointment. Now, this entire paragraph here is really a long-winded way of saying that the reason that this stupid alliance exists is because of the Marxists. So he's basically blaming this geopolitical alliance, which is, there are so many factors that go into that. Who the ruling elites are and what the governmental system is like and, recent history and have we historically been allies. All these things come into play. But, of course, he blames it on, it's the Marxists. He doesn't make an argument, right? All he really says is the Marxist teaching is basically causing this triple alliance to exist, right? Forcing us to make these stupid decisions, or our elites to make these stupid decisions, and it's because they're corrupting the foundations of a healthy and political economic outlook. So he just doesn't elaborate very much, right? It's all because of their worldview, this Weltanschauung. I apologize for my German pronunciation. I know it's wrong. I know it's bad. I'm sorry. But it is such wild stuff. You would think with as wordy as Hitler is, he would actually, make a good argument. No. There's not one good argument. Not yet. Maybe we'll get to one. Who knows? It was no more effective than the application of some quack's ointment. And of course, well, how do you really get rid of the disease, right? It needs to be exterminated. Needs to be exterminated. All the Marxists. So we have finally made it all the way to chapter number 5, where he starts talking about the First World War. And he starts it off, modestly enough, talking about himself in his youth. This is kind of the theme of this whole book. But he kind of regrettably talks about how he lives in a time and a place when people are building statues instead of war heroes, right? Instead of making, more statues for military leaders and generals, they're building statues for business people, state officials. How disgusting. These people aren't conquerors, they're shopkeepers, bureaucrats. So I just find this whole overemphasis on war to be, again, another one of these nutty little ideas sprinkled into the recipe, right? And I think it's one of the scariest because really you can see right here that Hitler considers historical achievements. I mean, that's winning a war. That's it. There are no other historical achievements. Nothing else matters. Conquering people, killing people, and taking their stuff, taking their land, that is historical achievement. Anything else doesn't matter, right? Create a great business that makes life better for everyone. You don't even need to hurt people to do it. Forget you, man. Shopkeeper, right? Pass some foreign policy that changes the world, or pass a law that encourages more business and makes life better for people. Even pass progressive laws. Nah, forget it, man. Forget it. Clowns. Go invade someone. I think this little quote right here tells you all you need to know about Hitler's outlook. Quote, "Why could I not have been born 100 years ago? I used to ask myself, somewhere about the time of the wars of liberation, when a man was still of some value, even though he had no business." What he says here when he says a man is still of some value, even when he has no business, I think this is almost a reflection of his own low self-esteem. Because he is really saying here, well, he doesn't have value without this business. The real value is in fighting these wars, right? And of course, he always talked about later on how his time in World War I was like the best time of his life. It was amazing. It was the only time he truly felt like he belonged. You know, all that kind of stuff. So, it's just kind of sad. I just couldn't imagine determining the value of human life based on whether or not, you're going out and fighting and killing people. And here we've come to a point when Hitler is talking about how World War I started. How he was actually really surprised that it was a bunch of Serbians that had been the one to kill Franz Ferdinand, right, the Archduke, and that launched World War I and everything else. So he's surprised because the Habsburgs, the Austrian nobility, they had been the greatest friends of the Slavs. And here are the Slavs attacking them. So I think it kind of says, number one, that Hitler, I think he kind of overemphasizes how good the Slavs had it in Austria-Hungary. I think that he really just kind of nails down on this propaganda purpose that, they're getting it so much better. They're trying to get rid of our language and let them speak their language. I think secondly, I think it actually underlines one of the more reasonable ideas that the Nazis had. And this is the idea of having countries completely organized around racial lines, right? So countries completely organized of people of one race, and then if you have people from another race, they go and they live in their own country, right? Separatism. And this was not just popular amongst the Nazis, most infamously, but it was also kind of general public opinion. I mean, people in the Western countries, right? France and the UK and America, there were a lot of people from those places that were reasonable people that also thought that countries should be organized around the, racial line, right? So that's kind of interesting. I think if you had lived through this time and you were there to witness Archduke Franz Ferdinand being gunned down by a bunch of Serbian protesters, I think it would be pretty reasonable to come to the conclusion that different races cannot live together. Now, of course, it kind of shows that Hitler didn't read much about anywhere else, because there are plenty of examples that, different races can live together in relative peace, right? I mean, the United States, right? But there are other examples. So we're about on page 140 now. I've skipped a couple pages. I hope you don't mind. Hitler goes on quite a bit about, the bravery of the German soldier and this national pride. And people aren't going to talk about bravery for 1,000 years without mentioning the German soldiers of World War I. I mean, it's just so over the top. It is not even funny. But he kind of gets to the point where he's talking about how even early on in the war, the German soldier is gradually and slowly being betrayed by the parliamentarians, the politicians, the Jews, the press, all the typical narrative that you associate with this time period. And now he's kind of talking about ideology and different ideas and how to stop them, really. So what I find really fascinating is that I think he may actually have a bit of a point here. Now, he goes on for a very long time and a lot of, I wouldn't say detail, but he's just very long-winded with the way he says what he says. But basically he is saying that when you have an idea that you want to stop, an ideological contamination, right? Marxism, for example, when you want to stop it and get rid of it, you can't just go in and kill people for the sake of that without having some kind of moral or spiritual belief of your own. You need to create a dynamic where it is an ideology versus an ideology, where it's not just, the government recognizes these people as bad, so the government's going to kill them, because what that does is it creates a persecution complex, right? It's basically propaganda for the other side. If you are a communist revolutionary and you are persecuted for no good reason, then that is very good for you because you can publicize that fact. You can tell the whole world. People are going to write about it. Everyone in the world is going to be like, listen, this communist did nothing wrong and he's being persecuted by the government for no reason. I mean, it's very effective propaganda. And Hitler kind of catches on to this fact because he understands that when it comes to all these people that are communists, you can't just kill them all. Right? You need to have your own Weltanschauung, or world's view, which kind of battles it. And it's going to serve as, it's going to put that flame out, and then, it's going to, the idea is going to burn with a new flame. He's actually very abstract about it. I'll give him that. This is a very abstract book. But I think that's a really interesting idea. Because in practice, that is essentially what he did. It wasn't so much a battle of, people versus people. It was more a battle of ideas or spirits. He got all his ideas about this, right? He even says it right here. So at the time, I turned these questions over and over again in my mind by studying analogous cases exemplified in history, particularly those which had arisen from religious circumstances. I came to the following fundamental conclusion, and then he kind of goes into detail about how the ideas need to be battling. It can't be people persecuting people with a certain idea. It arises, this idea, he gets this from the religious circumstances of, the Protestant Reformation, religious wars, all those kinds of ideas. I think the fact that he gets that out of that is very, very fascinating. I know I've probably mentioned this quite a few times throughout the series, but I mean, when you look at Nazism, the tenets of it, the core beliefs, it really does fulfill the role of some kind of religion. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Nazis persecuted Christians. I mean, they put on a front. They kind of pretended to be pro-Christian for a little while. It was all a big trick. They wanted the state, the Nazi ideology, to be the religion of the people. So the fact that he used inspiration from, the religious wars of Europe, I think that it kind of underlines that, Hitler may have been kind of a goofy person in a lot of ways, in a lot more than one. We've talked about a lot of those ways. He's kind of goofy. But I think he kind of hit the nail on the head there. The idea that it needs to be ideas versus ideas. It's not communists being unduly persecuted for this or that reason. It is, the National Socialists restoring honor by locking up all the communists. And that's basically what he says. Hitler puts it in a really succinct and nice way when he says, quote, "But there is something else to be said, Every Weltanschauung, whether religious or political, and it is sometimes difficult to say where the one ends and the other begins, fights not so much for the negative destruction of the opposing worlds of ideas as for the positive realization of its own ideas. There you go. Very fascinating, very interesting, and again, I think it kind of shows that as nutty as Hitler is, there were some things that he had a really good understanding of. So that's a really interesting little bit right there. And then he goes into more detail on this idea. He kind of says how this is why Marxism, the struggle against Marxism, failed. This is why the Marxists keep growing, because the people in the government, the people that are in power, they identify it as bad. They identify it as subversive and against their own interests, but they fail to provide a good alternative view. They don't fight it with an idea. They are just fighting to stop something. And the more you try to stop something, the more it's going to grow. It's kind of like trying to fight a fire by throwing alcohol on it, right? You think you're going to put it out. You think it's going to, calm the flame, but all it does is make it get even bigger. You need to fight fire with fire. That way your flame can envelop the other flame. So that's kind of the way Hitler wanted to go about his ideas. He also says this is why Bismarck's anti-socialist legislation failed in the long run, and it was bound to fail. But that is going to be it for this episode. I really hope you guys are enjoying the series. If you have any thoughts on the whole Weltanschauung and different political ideas and the flame enveloping the other flame, make sure to leave a comment, because I just find that whole topic so interesting. I'll probably explore some of that in a different video on its own, because I just think that whole idea itself is, again, so fascinating. And then Hitler's take on it is even more interesting, because I think, again, it's one of those things that he may have gotten right. So if you have any thoughts, let me know. Sometimes you guys will leave comments, and I am completely blown away by some of the things you guys point out. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? Or, oh my gosh, how didn't I see that? So you are making me smarter in the process. So thank you for that. And if you guys want to become a patron, get some bonus content, get your name on the big screen at the start of every video, a link will be in the description. And thank you so much to anyone that is or will become a patron and support the show. This has been History for Thinkers. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.
Mm-hmm.